The evening sun cast golden streaks across the glass walls of the Azure Lounge, one of the city's most elegant restaurants. Waiters moved briskly between tables, their trays balanced with wine glasses that sparkled under the chandeliers. Behind the polished counter, Emily Carter adjusted her apron and tied her hair into a loose bun. The faint aroma of roasted garlic and thyme hung in the air, mixing with the low hum of jazz that floated from the speakers. It was just another long shift for her. She'd been on her feet since noon. Her smile came automatically, trained through years of dealing with demanding customers. Yet behind it lingered exhaustion. Rent was due in 3 days, her brother's school fees were piling up, and she hadn't had a proper meal since morning. Still, she found a kind of peace in the rhythm of her work. Cleaning tables, serving orders, listening to people's laughter, it distracted her from the silence of her tiny apartment. The door swung open with a soft chime. Emily glanced up out of habit, ready to greet whoever entered. But the man who stepped inside made her breath hitch. Alexander Hayes. The name alone was enough to command a room. Tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, he carried an aura of quiet authority. People recognized him instantly, the widowed CEO of Hayes International, a man known for rebuilding an empire after tragedy struck his family. Yet tonight, there was something different about him. He moved slower, his eyes dim, as if he carried the weight of a memory too heavy to set down. As Alexander crossed the restaurant, conversations hushed briefly. He didn't seem to notice. His gaze wandered aimlessly until it landed on Emily, and then he stopped. Time, for him, fractured into 1,000 shards. The sight of her face hit him like a lightning strike. The shape of her eyes, the curve of her lips, it was as if Claire, his late wife, had been resurrected before him. His chest tightened painfully, and for a moment, he forgot how to breathe. Emily blinked, confused by his sudden stillness. "Good evening, sir," she said, her voice polite yet gentle. "Table for one." He didn't answer immediately. His jaw flexed, and his hands trembled slightly as he nodded. "Yes, table for one." His voice was hoarse, almost fragile. As she led him to his seat, he couldn't look away. Every step she took echoed with memories, of laughter, of dinners by candlelight, of the woman he had loved and lost. When Emily handed him the menu and their fingers brushed briefly, a strange current passed between them, one born not of attraction, but recognition of shared loneliness. Neither of them spoke it aloud, but both felt it linger in the quiet air between them. Emily stood by his table, pen poised over her small notepad, trying to shake off the strange tension that hung between them. The man's eyes, intense and unreadable, followed her every movement. She'd seen hundreds of customers in this restaurant, but no one had ever looked at her like that. It wasn't flirtation or curiosity, it was sorrow. Deep, raw sorrow, buried behind a practiced calm. She forced a polite smile. "Would you like to start with something to drink, sir?" Alexander blinked, as if snapping out of a trance. "Water is fine," he murmured. His gaze softened slightly, studying her face again. There it was, her smile. The same smile that used to greet him in the mornings when life was still kind. His chest ached. He hadn't felt this lost in years. For so long, he'd buried his grief beneath work, meetings, mergers, and endless late nights. But now, sitting in front of this waitress who looked so much like Claire, everything he'd suppressed began to surface. Emily wrote down his order quickly, uncomfortable under his scrutiny. She tried to retreat, but his quiet voice stopped her. "Wait, what's your name?" She hesitated. "Emily," she said finally. The sound of it hit him like a punch. Not Claire, but close. The resemblance was cruel, almost deliberate, as if fate were mocking him. "Emily," he repeated softly, tasting the name like a fragile memory. She frowned slightly. "Have we met before, sir?" His lips curved in a sad, almost broken smile. "No," he said after a long pause. "But, you remind me of someone I used to know." She nodded awkwardly, unsure what to say. Customers sometimes said strange things, but this felt different. There was something heavy behind his words, something that made her chest tighten unexpectedly. As she turned to leave, his voice followed her again, quieter this time, hesitant, almost pleading. "Would you sit with me for a minute?" Emily froze. That was against the rules. But when she looked at him, really looked at him, she saw a man on the verge of breaking. His hands were clasped tightly together, knuckles white, as though holding himself back from falling apart in public. "I'm sorry, sir. I can't," she said softly, forcing a small smile. "It's against policy." Alexander's eyes dropped to the tablecloth. "Of course," he murmured, his tone barely audible. She walked away, but his face stayed in her mind. There was something haunting about him, something that whispered of deep loss and quiet desperation. She didn't know his story, but she could feel it in her bones. This man wasn't just lonely. He was searching for someone who no longer existed. And somehow, she reminded him of her. Emily returned to his table a few minutes later, balancing a tray with his drink and appetizer. Her steps were steady, but inside, her pulse fluttered with unease. She didn't know why she felt so nervous around this man. Maybe it was the way he looked at her. Not like a stranger, but like someone precious he'd lost long ago. "Here you go, sir," she said, placing the glass of water and plate in front of him. "Would you like anything else?" Alexander's fingers lingered on the glass, but he didn't drink. His eyes lifted slowly to meet hers. "Emily," he began, his voice low and uncertain, "this might sound strange, but, can I ask you something?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Of course." He took a deep breath, as though summoning the courage for something impossible. "Would you be my date for one day?" The words hit her like a shock. For a moment, she thought she'd misheard. I'm sorry," she stammered, blinking in disbelief. Alexander's gaze didn't waver. There was no humor in his tone, no hint of flirtation. Just a quiet desperation. "I'm serious. I lost someone, a long time ago. My wife." His throat tightened around the word. "She's been gone for 3 years. And you look just like her. The way you smile, the way you speak, it's like seeing her again." Emily's heart clenched. She'd served her share of lonely men, but this wasn't that. His voice trembled with something raw and genuine, something that made her chest ache. Still, she struggled to process what he was asking. "Sir, I don't think that's appropriate," she said softly. "You don't even know me." "I know," he said quickly, running a hand through his hair. "I don't expect you to understand. He broke off, exhaling shakily. "Tomorrow would have been our anniversary. I thought I could handle it alone, but when I saw you, I felt something I haven't felt in years. For one day, I just want to remember what it was like to be happy." The sincerity in his words silenced her. His pain hung in the air between them, fragile and real. Emily's own memories stirred, her parents' faces, the ache of loss that never fully faded. She understood that kind of emptiness. She swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. "You want me to pretend to be her?" she asked quietly. "No," he said, shaking his head. "Just be yourself. Spend a day with me. Talk, laugh, share a meal. I don't want a fantasy. I just want to feel human again." For a long moment, Emily stood there, torn between logic and empathy. Everything in her told her to say no, but when she looked into his eyes, she saw not a powerful CEO, but a lonely man begging for one more heartbeat of the past. Finally, she whispered, "One day." Alexander's shoulders sagged in relief, his eyes glimmering with gratitude, and something dangerously close to hope. Neither of them knew it yet, but that single word would alter both of their lives forever. The next morning dawned gray and gentle, the kind of morning that smelled faintly of rain. Emily stood in front of her mirror, staring at her reflection as she brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. She wasn't sure what to wear for something like this, a date that wasn't really a date, with a man who wasn't really looking for love. Her fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted the simple cream blouse she'd chosen. "It's just one day," she whispered to her reflection, as if saying it out loud would make it easier to believe. When she arrived at the cafe Alexander had chosen, he was already there, sitting by the window. The morning light softened his sharp features, making him look less like the cold, distant CEO she'd seen last night and more like a man simply trying to remember how to breathe. He stood as she approached, offering a hesitant smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You came," he said quietly, almost disbelieving. Emily nodded. "You asked for one day. I thought I could give you that." He gestured for her to sit, and for a while, they just talked. At first, it was awkward. Small talk about the weather, about her job, about nothing that really mattered. But slowly, the distance between them began to fade. He told her about how he used to take his wife to this same cafe every Sunday morning, how Claire loved their blueberry scones and always complained about how terrible the coffee was, yet never ordered anything else. Emily listened quietly, her heart tightening at the tenderness in his voice. When she laughed softly at one of his stories, Alexander froze. The sound was so familiar, it was like hearing an echo from another life. "You even laugh like her," he murmured before he could stop himself. Embarrassed, he looked away, his throat constricting. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that." "It's okay," Emily said gently. "She must have been someone very special." "She was my whole world," he replied. "And when she died, I thought the world ended with her." His voice cracked slightly. "But sitting here with you, it feels like I can breathe again." They spent the rest of the day walking through the city, by the riverside, through flower markets, and down quiet streets where sunlight danced through the leaves. For the first time in years, Alexander smiled without forcing it. Emily, too, felt something unexpected, a fragile warmth that reminded her she wasn't just surviving, she was living. As dusk settled, they sat on a park bench, the city lights beginning to shimmer around them. "Thank you," Alexander said, his voice barely above a whisper. "For giving me today." Emily turned to him, her eyes soft. "Maybe today wasn't about pretending, Alexander. Maybe it was about remembering how to feel." He looked at her then, really looked at her, not as Claire's shadow, but as Emily. The ache in his chest didn't vanish, but for the first time in years, it didn't consume him either. When they parted, neither made promises. But both walked away changed. Two lonely souls who had found, for one fleeting day, a reason to believe that healing was still possible.